David had always believed he and Charlotte were the picture of a modern, ambitious couple, successful in their respective careers, deeply in love, and living in the pulse of a vibrant city. They had met in college, a chance encounter during a crowded lecture hall that had felt like destiny. From the start, Charlotte captivated him. She was magnetic in every sense, with a confidence that set her apart and a beauty that made her unforgettable. David was drawn to her like gravity, and his attraction only grew stronger over time. They shared an undeniable physical chemistry, one that had kept their relationship fiery through the years. Charlotte, with her dark hair and sharp features, exuded a quiet intensity that David found irresistible. She matched his energy in every way, both in their personal life and in their shared ambitions. Together, they seemed to complete each other, each providing what the other lacked. Charlotte's determination and sharp intellect balanced David's creative, laid-back nature. As their careers took off, they grew into a life that was, at least on the surface, picture perfect. David found satisfaction in his work as a graphic designer, while Charlotte thrived as an attorney, excelling in a field that demanded all of her mental strength and ambition. He often admired the way she could walk into a room and command attention, her presence filling the space. But lately, an unfamiliar tension had crept into their lives. David couldn't ignore the subtle shifts in Charlotte's behavior, the increasing late nights, the mysterious calls that ended as soon as he walked into the room, her vague explanations that left him feeling more distant from her than ever before. He tried to brush it off, telling himself that her work was simply consuming her attention, yet a shadow of doubt lingered, gnawing at the edges of his mind. Their life, once so vivid and full, was beginning to feel more like an illusion, something beautiful on the surface but fragile beneath. David tried to ignore the nagging feeling, telling himself that Charlotte's increasing absences were just a result of her intense career demands. But the subtle shifts in her behavior became harder to dismiss. The late nights at the office, the hushed phone calls she excused herself to take, and the vague explanations when he asked where she'd been. It all left him with a sense of unease he couldn't shake. He noticed the way Charlotte's eyes darted to her phone whenever it chimed, her responses quick yet curt whenever he asked who was calling. The warmth that once filled their conversations had grown cooler, replaced by something clipped and distant. Even their weekends, once sacred time for the two of them to reconnect, had begun to fall victim to her urgent work commitments that always seemed to come up last minute. Feeling isolated in his suspicions, David confided in his closest friend Mark, who had known both him and Charlotte since their college days. They met at a dimly lit bar where David nursed his drink, eyes downcast as he poured out his worries. Mark listened intently, concern etching his face. "Look, man," he said, after David finished. "I don't want to jump to conclusions, but if your instincts are telling you something's wrong, don't ignore them." David nodded, but the thought of mistrusting Charlotte gnawed at him. She had always been the strong, grounded half of their relationship. Could he really allow himself to believe that she might be hiding something? As days passed, David found himself scrutinizing every interaction, every excuse. His mind became a battlefield, torn between trust and doubt, between rationalizing Charlotte's behavior and the cold, creeping suspicion that something was deeply amiss. He hated himself for it, yet couldn't deny the way his stomach twisted every time she glanced at her phone or made another vague excuse to step out. Their home, once a place of comfort, now felt tense and uncertain, filled with invisible walls. And as he watched the woman he loved become more and more of a stranger, David knew that their perfect life, the image he had clung to for so long, was beginning to crack. David wasn't looking for evidence. At least, that's what he told himself as he aimlessly scrolled through their messages, organizing his own digital life while Charlotte was out. But then he saw it, a notification lighting up her phone, which she'd left on the kitchen counter. The message preview was brief, but it said enough. "Last night was unforgettable. Let's meet again soon." It was from Matthew, her boss. His pulse raced, and he felt his hands shake as he absorbed the words. Unforgettable? Meet again soon? His mind reeled, refusing to accept the implications. He waited for her to return, heart pounding, barely containing the mixture of betrayal and anger that simmered beneath his skin. When Charlotte walked through the door, he couldn't hold back. He confronted her, choosing his words carefully, but unable to hide the hurt in his voice. "I saw a message from Matthew. What exactly is going on between you two?" Charlotte's face remained composed, but a glint of something unspoken passed through her eyes. She brushed him off, her tone clipped. "David, you're being paranoid. You've always been too jealous. It's nothing. Just work." But David couldn't shake the feeling that her answer was far from the truth. Her dismissive response only deepened the chasm of doubt growing between them. Over the next few days, the tension in their home grew heavier, thick with unspoken accusations and half-hearted reassurances. David told himself he had to trust her. After all, Charlotte was his wife, and he'd loved her with a devotion that had once felt unshakable. But his resolve faltered again when he noticed a bracelet, a delicate, elegant piece lying in her jewelry box, sparkling as if taunting him. It was beautiful, clearly expensive, and he was certain he had never seen it before. Charlotte wasn't one for impulsive purchases, and they always discussed any significant expenses. So where had it come from? Questions flooded his mind, each one more troubling than the last. Was it a gift? Was it from Matthew? David wrestled with his suspicions, unable to shake the dread gnawing at him but unwilling to admit what it all pointed to. He tried to convince himself it was all just a misunderstanding, that he was reading too much into small details, that his insecurities were clouding his judgment. But no matter how hard he tried, the evidence of betrayal lingered, casting a dark shadow over everything they'd built together. The moment came unexpectedly. David wasn't intending to search Charlotte's bag, but a nagging feeling urged him on. He told himself it was a harmless glance, just a way to quiet the growing unease that had taken root in his mind. But as his hand brushed past her phone and wallet, he found something that stopped him cold. A single unmarked key on a silver keyring, one he had never seen before. He stood there, staring at it, his thoughts racing. What could this key be for? Why would Charlotte keep a key he didn't recognize, tucked away like a secret? It was a small detail, yet it felt monumental, like the final piece in a puzzle he hadn't wanted to complete. Heart pounding, David pocketed the key and made a quick trip to have a duplicate made. Over the next few days, David's suspicion evolved into something darker, something angrier. He found himself watching Charlotte more closely, studying her every movement and interaction, looking for cracks in her carefully maintained facade. The little changes he'd noticed before, the late nights, the cryptic messages, the bracelet, were no longer isolated incidents. Together, they painted a damning picture of betrayal. Finally, one night when Charlotte told him she had to work late, David followed her. The city's streets blurred past him as he trailed her car from a safe distance, his pulse hammering in his ears. Every mile he drove was like another wound, a painful confirmation that his suspicions were not born from paranoia, but from a grim reality he could no longer ignore. Charlotte parked outside a modest apartment complex, glancing around as though ensuring she hadn't been followed. David watched from the shadows, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He knew, without a doubt, what this place meant, who waited for her inside. The pain he felt was indescribable, a piercing ache that hollowed him out from the inside. Yet mingled with the anguish was a fierce, simmering rage. Charlotte had lied to him, over and over, while he had been faithful, devoted. The life they'd built together was a sham, a carefully woven illusion he had clung to because he wanted to believe in it. As he sat in his car, waiting for her to emerge, David struggled with the flood of emotions: betrayal, anger, grief. He had always imagined that their marriage was built on love and trust, that they were partners, committed to each other. But now, that foundation lay shattered, replaced by a bitter truth that he could no longer deny. In that moment, David understood the full weight of Charlotte's betrayal. This wasn't just a momentary lapse, a careless mistake. It was a deliberate, ongoing deception. He felt his heart harden, the love he once held for her buried beneath layers of hurt and fury. The confrontation was inevitable, and when it came, he knew it would leave both of them irrevocably changed. David had a choice. He knew that if he used the key to open that door, there would be no turning back. Whatever he saw would shatter his life as he knew it, making it impossible to pretend or ignore the truth any longer. But he also knew that he couldn't continue living in limbo, caught between suspicion and the remains of the life they once shared. His hands were shaking as he inserted the key into the lock, the quiet click echoing in the silent hallway. The door opened to reveal the scene he dreaded, yet somehow knew was waiting for him. Charlotte was there, tangled with Matthew on the couch, their faces inches apart, a picture of intimacy that ripped through David's heart like a blade. For a moment, it was as though time itself had frozen. The room went silent, and all David could hear was the pounding of his own heart. Rage surged through him, raw and uncontrolled. He stepped forward, his vision narrowing on Matthew, and without a word, he swung his fist. It connected with Matthew's face, the force of it sending him sprawling off the couch. Charlotte screamed, her face pale with shock and fear as she scrambled away, her voice trembling as she tried to speak. "David, please. I didn't mean for it to happen. It doesn't mean anything, I swear." David didn't respond. He turned his gaze to her, his eyes filled with fury and disbelief. For a moment, Charlotte saw the depth of his heartbreak, the pain she had caused him, and her words faltered, dying in her throat. The room seemed to spin around him, everything he had once cherished crumbling before his eyes. Without another word, David turned and walked out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. The pain of seeing Charlotte with Matthew twisted in his chest, but even more so, the realization that their life together had been a lie. Everything they had shared, the laughter, the love, the plans for their future, felt hollow, a farce that had masked her deception. Later that evening, back in their empty home, David sat on the couch staring blankly at the wall. It was as if the world around him had dulled, his emotions drained, leaving behind only a hollow numbness. It wasn't until there was a knock at the door that he stirred, the sound echoing through the silence. Opening the door, David found Charlotte's friend Rachel standing there. Her face was filled with an uneasy mix of sympathy and discomfort. "I'm here to get some of Charlotte's things," she said softly, her eyes flicking past him into the house. She's too scared to come back herself. She's really sorry, David. She knows she's made a terrible mistake." David stepped aside wordlessly, letting Rachel in. As she moved through the house, gathering some of Charlotte's clothes, she paused, her expression softening. "Look, I think you deserve to know," Rachel said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "Matthew, he's been seeing Charlotte for a few months now. She thought if she did this, it might help her career, get her that promotion she's been after. I know it sounds awful, but I think she was just desperate. She said she didn't mean for it to go this far." David felt the words hit him like a punch to the gut. He closed his eyes, letting out a shaky breath. Everything he had believed in was gone, replaced by the bitter reality of betrayal. Charlotte's ambition had led her to sacrifice the one thing he thought they both held sacred, their love. And now, all that was left was the emptiness of their broken promises. In the days that followed, David made a decision he knew was inevitable. There was no going back, no salvaging what was left of their marriage after everything that had happened. The love he once felt for Charlotte was buried beneath layers of betrayal, and he realized that holding on any longer would only prolong the pain. He packed his things in silence, moving out of the home they had shared for years. Every room seemed to echo with memories. The laughter, the late nights spent talking about their dreams, the love they had once shared. But now those moments felt like ghosts, reminders of what they had lost. As David carried the last box to his car, he allowed himself one last look at the place that had once been his sanctuary, and then he drove away, leaving it all behind. life became a series of quiet, solitary moments. He found an apartment on the other side of the city, a modest space that was entirely his own. In the beginning, the silence was overwhelming, the loneliness almost unbearable. But gradually, David found solace in the stillness, in the freedom of not having to pretend anymore. He began to fill his time with the things he had once loved: painting, long walks in the park, evenings spent with a good book. He thought a lot about his marriage, about the mistakes they both had made. There were moments of deep regret, of anger and sadness, but there were also glimmers of hope, a growing sense of possibility for the future. He realized that the love he had shared with Charlotte had been flawed, built on ambition and a need to fit a certain image of success. It wasn't the kind of love that could withstand the storms of life, and he had paid the price for that. Months passed, and slowly, David began to heal. He found himself smiling more, the weight of his past lifting little by little. And then one day, he met someone new. Her name was Emily, a gentle, kind woman who worked at a local art gallery. She had a warmth about her, an openness that was refreshing after the secrecy and deception that had plagued his marriage. She listened to him, really listened, without judgment or expectation. Their relationship grew slowly, each moment with Emily a reminder of what love could be: simple, honest, and joyful. She appreciated David for who he was, never asking him to change or be someone he wasn't. With her, David felt a sense of peace he hadn't realized he was missing, a sense of belonging that made him feel truly seen. As their love blossomed, David found himself rediscovering his passion for life. He began painting again, inspired by Emily's encouragement and the joy he found in their time together. They spent weekends exploring the city, visiting art galleries, and sharing quiet moments that filled the empty spaces in his heart. For the first time in a long while, David felt happy, not because of what he had or who he was with, but simply because he was alive. It wasn't the kind of dramatic, all-consuming love he had once believed in. It was quieter, steadier, built on trust and mutual respect. And that, David realized, was exactly what he needed. The past with Charlotte would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. Instead, he chose to look forward, to embrace the life that lay ahead, one filled with love, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. Charlotte had gotten what she wanted. The promotion she had worked so hard for was finally hers. She was now a senior partner, the title and responsibilities that came with it a testament to her ambition and drive. From the outside, it appeared that everything had gone according to plan. But the reality was far less satisfying than she had imagined. She sat alone in her spacious office, staring out at the city skyline as dusk settled in, her thoughts drifting to the choices she had made. Her affair with Matthew had been a calculated risk, a way to ensure her advancement in a competitive, unforgiving world. But what had seemed like a necessary sacrifice now felt like a hollow victory. Matthew had moved on as she should have known he would. It had only been a few months since David had walked out of her life, and already, Matthew's attention had shifted to someone else, a young associate, barely out of law school, eager to please and just as hungry for success as Charlotte once had been. Watching him flirt with his new interest at the office, Charlotte felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name: jealousy, regret, perhaps even shame. In the end, Matthew had been nothing more than a stepping stone, a means to an end, and she had been the same for him. She thought of David then, of the way he had looked at her in that apartment, the hurt and anger in his eyes as he turned and walked away. She had told herself that her actions had been justified, that she was doing what she needed to do to succeed. But as she sat alone, the empty silence of her office echoing around her, she began to question whether the price she had paid had been worth it. Her evenings were now filled with paperwork and empty television shows, the quiet of her apartment pressing in on her, the luxury of her promotion, the new office, the higher salary, felt meaningless without anyone to share it with. David had always been there, her steady support, the one person she could count on no matter what. And now, she had driven him away, left with nothing but her ambition and a title that seemed to mean less with each passing day. The weight of her decisions bore down on her, a heaviness that settled deep in her chest. She had thought that success would fill the emptiness she had felt, that achieving her goals would bring her the fulfillment she had been craving. But instead, she found herself more alone than ever, the cost of her betrayal now painfully clear. Meanwhile, David was moving forward, rebuilding his life, finding love and joy in a way that she could no longer reach. She heard about him through mutual friends, how he had started painting again, how he was seeing someone new, a woman who seemed to make him genuinely happy. And though it stung to hear, there was a part of Charlotte that felt relieved, knowing that David had found a way to heal, to find the happiness she had taken from him. As she sat in her empty apartment, Charlotte realized that her ambition had led her to this moment, alone, with only her regrets to keep her company. She had traded love for success, and now that success felt hollow, devoid of any real meaning. The life she had once envisioned for herself was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of her own choices.